Right now, while you are watching this, the ground is moving in multiple parts of the world. Venezuela has just experienced a devastating pair of powerful earthquakes separated by only seconds. Japan was struck by a magnitude 7.4 event that prompted authorities to issue tsunami warnings. Researchers studying California have released new findings about dangerously elevated stress across the San Andreas fault system. And within the same broader period, earthquakes have also rattled the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Nicaragua, and other tectonically active regions. When all of those headlines appear next to each other, it can feel as though something unusual is happening to the planet. Are earthquakes suddenly becoming more frequent? Are major fault systems somehow influencing one another? Is the Earth entering a period of greater geological instability? Those are reasonable questions. And today we are going to separate what is genuinely alarming from what only looks alarming when several major earthquakes happen close together in time. We will look closely at Venezuela, where the human consequences have been catastrophic. We will compare that disaster with Japan, where an earthquake of almost identical magnitude produced a dramatically different outcome. Then we will move to California, where new research about the San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems raises serious questions about Southern California's long-term earthquake risk. After that, we will zoom out and answer the bigger question. Is the planet actually more seismically active than normal? No speculation. No pretending earthquakes can be predicted when they cannot. Just the geology, the science, the risk, and what all of this means for the people living above these fault systems. Before we begin, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever personally experienced an earthquake? Maybe it was a small tremor that barely moved the lights. Maybe dishes rattled. Maybe furniture shifted. Or maybe you lived through something strong enough that the memory has never left you. Tell me where you were and what the shaking felt like. A huge number of people watching this channel live in earthquake-prone regions, and hearing those experiences reminds us that earthquakes are not simply numbers appearing on geological monitoring websites. They are human events. And if you want updates whenever something major happens beneath the Earth's surface, subscribe to the channel. A like also helps push these reports toward people who may actually need the information. Let us see if we can reach 5000 likes on this one. Now let us start with Venezuela. On June 24, 2026, Venezuela experienced what is being described as the country's most powerful earthquake sequence in more than a century. And the word sequence is important. This was not simply one major earthquake followed hours later by an aftershock. Two extremely powerful ruptures occurred only about 39 seconds apart. 39 seconds? That is barely enough time for someone to understand that the first earthquake is happening, much less move to safety before another major rupture begins. The first event was measured at approximately magnitude 7.2. The stronger main shock followed at around magnitude 7.5. The earthquake struck northwestern Venezuela in the broader region west of San Felipe. Analysis indicated strike-slip movement, meaning blocks of crust were moving primarily sideways past one another along the fault. Some seismologists examining the complexity of the rupture have suggested that the two earthquakes may ultimately be understood as parts of one unusually complicated seismic sequence, with an overall energy release approaching what would be expected from an even larger event. But magnitude alone does not explain what happened. To understand why the destruction became so severe, you need to understand depth. These earthquakes were shallow. The rupture occurred only about 10 kilometers beneath the surface. That is extremely important. When an earthquake occurs very deep underground, seismic waves must travel through a large amount of rock before reaching towns and cities. Some energy is scattered and attenuated along the way. But when a powerful rupture happens only a few kilometers beneath populated areas, there is very little geological distance available to reduce the force of the shaking. The energy reaches the surface quickly, and everything built above that rupture is exposed to extremely violent ground motion. Then you have the second factor, buildings. Venezuela entered this disaster after years of economic instability and underinvestment in infrastructure. Maintenance has been delayed across many communities. Construction quality varies dramatically. In poorer neighborhoods, large numbers of residents live in unreinforced masonry or concrete block structures that were never designed to move safely during strong earthquakes. Earthquake-resistant buildings are not built to remain perfectly rigid. They are engineered to deform, to flex, to absorb energy, to move without collapsing. Unreinforced masonry often does the opposite. It is strong until movement exceeds what the structure can tolerate. Then it fails suddenly. So when powerful shaking struck twice, within less than a minute, many buildings did not bend with the ground. They broke. Reports from the hardest-hit coastal and northwestern areas described extraordinary structural destruction. Entire blocks were heavily damaged. Roads became blocked by collapsed material. Electrical service failed across large areas. Communications networks went down. And once mobile networks stopped working, another layer of the disaster began. Families could not contact one another. Emergency responders could not coordinate normally. People outside the country had no idea whether relatives were alive. Rescue teams had difficulty determining which collapsed neighborhoods required the most immediate help. In Caracas, shaking was reportedly felt for close to a minute, sending enormous numbers of residents into streets and open areas. Airports and transportation infrastructure were disrupted. Hospitals faced sudden surges of injured people, while portions of the wider health system were already operating under severe strain before the earthquake. The early casualty projections were frightening. USGS rapid loss modeling suggested a substantial probability that the final death toll could climb into the tens of thousands. At the time represented in this script, confirmed fatalities had already risen into the thousands, while tens of thousands more were reported injured or missing. And almost everyone working inside the affected areas was warning that the confirmed number was likely far below the eventual total. That happens frequently after catastrophic earthquakes. People trapped beneath buildings may not be found for days. Entire neighborhoods may lose communications. Rural communities can remain isolated. Hospitals may record fatalities separately. Bodies may be recovered faster than officials can identify them, so early numbers often change dramatically. Reports from makeshift morgues illustrated just how overwhelmed local systems had become. Medical personnel were processing enormous numbers of bodies. Refrigerated storage filled. Identification became more difficult as time passed. And families living thousands of kilometers away were using photographs, social media posts, and rescue contacts to search for missing relatives. Imagine knowing your grandparents were inside a 7-story apartment building when it collapsed. You know roughly where they were? Rescuers have reached the building, but enormous slabs of concrete are blocking access. The rescue team tells you they need heavy lifting equipment before they can even begin searching the area where your family might be. That is the reality hidden behind earthquake casualty statistics. And Venezuela faced another devastating disadvantage. The country was already dealing with a major humanitarian emergency before the ground moved. Millions of people were already dependent on some form of assistance. Hospitals were underfunded. Medical supplies were limited. Infrastructure was fragile. Emergency response capacity was uneven. So the earthquake did not create every problem. It struck a country where many critical systems were already struggling. Satellite analysis suggested that the real scale of structural damage may have been dramatically greater than initial official assessments. Hospitals, schools, apartment blocks, public infrastructure, transportation networks. The financial losses quickly climbed into the billions of dollars. And for an economy already under severe pressure, losing even several percent of national GDP in less than a minute represents damage that could shape recovery for years. That brings us to Japan, because around the same general period, Japan was hit by a major earthquake of its own, and the contrast is extraordinary. On April 20th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck offshore along the northeastern Japanese coast near the Japan Trench. Initial estimates from Japanese agencies were somewhat higher before the magnitude was refined. The shaking was felt across an enormous section of the country. Residents from northern Japan all the way into central regions reported movement. Buildings in Tokyo reportedly swayed for an extended period. Authorities quickly issued tsunami warnings for sections of the northeastern coastline. Tens of thousands of people were told to evacuate from exposed coastal areas. Residents moved inland and toward higher ground. Ports were monitored. A tsunami wave of less than a meter was recorded in one coastal area. Warnings were later reduced and ultimately canceled. And when the event was over, the human toll was almost unbelievably small compared with Venezuela. Only a small number of injuries. No massive building collapse disaster. No death toll in the thousands. No city buried beneath rubble. Now think about those two magnitudes. Venezuela approximately 7.5. Japan approximately 7.4. From a purely numerical perspective, they sound remarkably similar. So why were the consequences so different? The answer is not that Japan got lucky. The answer is preparation. Japan has spent decades designing society around the reality that powerful earthquakes will happen. The country has some of the most demanding seismic construction standards anywhere in the world. And those standards continue evolving as engineers learn from every major earthquake. Modern buildings are designed to flex instead of fracture. Many large structures use base isolation systems that reduce the amount of ground motion transferred directly into the building. Think of them as enormous shock absorbers positioned between the structure and the earth. Transportation systems are linked to seismic monitoring. When sensors detect unusual seismic waves, trains can automatically begin slowing before the strongest shaking arrives. Hospitals are designed with emergency redundancy. Utilities have shut-off procedures. Schools conduct earthquake drills from childhood. Residents learn where to go during tsunami warnings. Emergency backpacks and evacuation routes are familiar ideas rather than strange preparations for a disaster that may never happen. After the 2026 earthquake, authorities also issued what Japan describes as a megaquake advisory. That wording can sound terrifying if you misunderstand it. It does not mean scientists predicted another earthquake. Earthquakes cannot currently be predicted with that level of precision. Instead, the advisory means the probability of another very large earthquake has temporarily increased relative to its normal background probability. If a major event changes stress conditions along a nearby tectonic zone, the short-term statistical risk can rise. The probability may still be low in absolute terms. But if it becomes significantly higher than normal, authorities communicate that change so residents can review evacuation routes, emergency supplies, and shelter plans. That is what preparedness culture looks like. Not panic. Routine attention to elevated risk. Japan has very good reasons to operate this way. The country sits in one of the most tectonically complicated environments on Earth. Multiple plates converge in and around the Japanese islands. The Pacific Plate interacts with surrounding plates along major subduction zones. The Philippine Sea Plate also plays a central role. The result is constant seismic activity. Japan experiences enormous numbers of measurable earthquakes every year. A significant fraction of the world's strongest earthquakes occur in or near the Japanese archipelago. This is not a country occasionally surprised by geology. This is a country built directly inside it. The northeastern coastline struck in 2026 is also connected to the broader tectonic system responsible for the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake. That magnitude 9.1 disaster generated a massive tsunami, killed nearly 2,000 people, and triggered the Fukushima nuclear accident. 15 years later, another very strong earthquake affects the same broad region. But this time, the casualty count remains extremely low. That tells us something fundamental. Earthquakes are geological. Earthquake disasters are partly human. The rupture determines the amount of energy released. But building codes, emergency planning, warning systems, infrastructure, education, and public behavior strongly influence how many people die. And that lesson becomes extremely important when we move to California. Because researchers studying Southern California's fault systems have released findings that deserve serious attention. A research team modeling stress across the San Andreas and San Jacinto systems concluded that portions of the fault network may currently be carrying extremely high levels of accumulated stress compared with their reconstructed history. To understand why that matters, imagine two enormous pieces of crust trying to slide past each other. At depth, tectonic plates continue moving, but portions of the fault near the surface can become locked by friction. The plates do not stop trying to move. Instead, the surrounding rock deforms. Stress accumulates. Year after year, decade after decade, sometimes century after century. Eventually, the amount of stored strain becomes greater than the friction and strength holding the fault locked. Then the rocks slip. Suddenly, that stored elastic energy is released as seismic waves. That is the earthquake. The southern section of the San Andreas has not experienced a major rupture for a very long time. The famous 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake, estimated around magnitude 7.9, ruptured a large portion of the system. Since then, plate motion has continued. The Pacific Plate and North American Plate still move relative to one another by several centimeters each year. If a fault segment remains locked while that motion continues, strain continues accumulating. Researchers attempting to reconstruct centuries of earthquake behavior use multiple forms of evidence. Historical earthquake descriptions, trenches excavated across ancient fault ruptures, displaced sediment layers, radiocarbon dates, tree ring evidence, geological offsets, modern GPS measurements, computer simulations. All of these help scientists estimate where stress has been released previously and where it may remain stored today. The new modeling described in the source script suggests that several sections of the Southern California system are now at unusually elevated stress levels. But an especially interesting part of the research involves the interaction between the San Andreas and the San Jacinto fault systems. These faults do not exist in isolation. Southern California contains an entire network of faults. In certain areas, ruptures may be capable of transferring from one structure to another. One important junction lies near the broader Cajon Pass region northeast of Los Angeles. Researchers have investigated whether a rupture traveling along one fault could continue through this complicated junction and trigger movement along another fault. You can think of it as an earthquake gate. Most of the time, geometry and stress conditions may prevent a rupture from passing cleanly through. But under the right combination of fault orientation, accumulated stress, and rupture direction, the gate may effectively open. A rupture could then involve more than one fault. That matters because multi-fault earthquakes can affect a much larger area than a rupture confined to one segment. A major combined event involving both the San Andreas and San Jacinto systems could threaten communities throughout Southern California, San Bernardino, Riverside County, the Coachella Valley, parts of the Los Angeles Basin, transportation corridors, utility lines, water infrastructure, and millions of people. Could scientists tell you when that earthquake will occur? No. That remains one of the most important points in this entire video. High stress does not produce a countdown clock. Scientists may be able to say a fault is capable of producing a major earthquake. They may estimate probabilities over decades. They may identify areas where stress has accumulated. But nobody can look at these models and say the earthquake will happen next Tuesday at 3:15 p.m. It could happen soon. It could happen years from now. It could happen decades from now. Geologically, those differences are extremely small. For humans, obviously they are enormous. But from the perspective of emergency planning, the uncertainty does not eliminate the responsibility to prepare. Southern California has more than 13 million people in the Los Angeles metropolitan region alone. Many neighborhoods are built on sedimentary basins that can amplify seismic waves. Some older apartment buildings contain soft-story construction that performs poorly during strong lateral shaking. Water lines cross fault zones. Gas networks cross fault zones. Freeways cross fault zones. Rail corridors cross fault zones. Hospitals depend on power, water communications, and transportation systems that may all be damaged at once. And earthquakes create secondary disasters. Broken gas mains can ignite fires. Damaged water lines can leave firefighters without enough pressure to fight those fires. Collapsed overpasses can block emergency vehicles. Cell towers can fail. Hospitals can become overwhelmed at the same time some hospitals themselves are damaged. So, when researchers urge planners to consider the possibility of a multi-fault rupture, they are not saying that disaster is imminent. They are saying that infrastructure planning should account for what the geology is physically capable of producing. Now step back again. Venezuela, Japan, California, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Nicaragua. When you see this many earthquake headlines appearing together, the human brain naturally wants to connect them. We are pattern recognition machines. Something must be happening. The planet must be entering an unusually active phase. Maybe one earthquake triggered another earthquake thousands of kilometers away. But the scientific answer is much less dramatic. Earth experiences earthquakes constantly. Thousands occur every day. Most are so weak that humans never notice them. They are recorded only by sensitive instruments. Even earthquakes strong enough to be felt occur very frequently somewhere on the planet. Magnitude 6 and larger events happen dozens to more than 100 times during a typical year. That means it is entirely possible to have multiple major earthquakes occur within a few days without anything abnormal happening globally. Venezuela and Japan are also controlled by different tectonic systems. They are separated by enormous distances. The forces creating one earthquake are not the same forces creating the other. An earthquake in northern South America does not suddenly send a meaningful tectonic signal across the planet that causes Japan's subduction zone to rupture. These events can occur close together in time while remaining geologically independent. That distinction matters, because the answer to "is Earth more active" is generally no. But there is another answer hiding underneath that one. Human exposure is increasing. The geology may not be changing dramatically, but the number of people living directly above dangerous faults has changed enormously. Much of the world's population growth during the last century has occurred in large cities. And many of those cities sit close to major tectonic boundaries. Tokyo, Manila, Jakarta, Los Angeles, Istanbul, Mexico City, Lima, Bogota, cities containing millions or tens of millions of residents. The geological processes beneath them existed long before those cities grew. The difference is that today, a single earthquake can affect enormous concentrations of population and infrastructure. That is why disaster researchers increasingly focus not only on hazard but on vulnerability. Hazard asks, how strong could the earthquake be? Vulnerability asks, what happens to the people and buildings when it arrives? And Venezuela demonstrates why that distinction is so important. The earthquake was powerful. Nothing could prevent the fault from rupturing. But economic deterioration, weak infrastructure, limited building reinforcement, underfunded emergency systems, and widespread poverty all magnified the consequences. Japan demonstrates the opposite. Japan cannot stop earthquakes either. But decades of engineering, planning, education, and investment dramatically changed the outcome. California sits somewhere between those two extremes. The state has strong modern building standards. It has sophisticated seismology. It operates the Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning Network. Many newer structures are designed extremely well, but large numbers of older, vulnerable buildings still exist. Retrofitting is expensive. Infrastructure crosses multiple fault zones. Preparedness varies by income and neighborhood. And public awareness tends to rise immediately after an earthquake and then fade as years pass without a catastrophic event. So what can ordinary people actually do? You cannot move the tectonic plates. You cannot eliminate a fault. You probably cannot rebuild your apartment building tomorrow. But you can prepare for the first several days after a major earthquake. Start with water. After a major rupture, damaged water systems may remain unreliable for days. Store enough drinking water for your household. Keep non-perishable food. Have basic first aid supplies. Keep necessary medications accessible. Store flashlights and batteries. Have portable phone chargers. Know where your home's gas shutoff is located and how to use it safely if authorities tell you to shut the gas down. Secure heavy furniture. Bookcases can fall. Televisions can fall. Cabinets can open. Water heaters can shift or rupture connections. Many earthquake injuries are caused not by collapsing skyscrapers, but by objects falling inside homes. Have a family communication plan. Mobile networks may become overloaded or fail entirely. Know who your out-of-area contact will be. Know where family members should meet if you cannot reach one another. Know the evacuation routes from your neighborhood. Those preparations can be completed in an afternoon. And after a major earthquake, they can dramatically change what the first 72 hours look like. Now, there is another earthquake concept that causes a lot of confusion. Magnitude. People hear magnitude 7.2 and magnitude 7.5 and assume the difference is tiny. After all, 7.5 does not look much larger than 7.2 when you see the numbers written beside each other. But earthquake magnitude is logarithmic. It is not a simple linear scale. A 1-unit increase in magnitude represents roughly 10 times greater ground motion amplitude and approximately 32 times more energy release. So a magnitude 7 earthquake is not just slightly stronger than a magnitude 6. The energy difference is enormous. A magnitude 8 releases roughly 32 times more energy than a magnitude 7. Move 2 whole magnitude units, and you are talking about roughly 1,000 times more energy. That is why earthquake scientists pay such close attention when events move into the magnitude 7 and 8 range. But once again, magnitude alone does not determine destruction. Depth matters. Distance matters. Ground conditions matter. A powerful earthquake beneath an uninhabited region may produce relatively few casualties. A somewhat smaller, shallow earthquake directly beneath a densely populated city can become catastrophic. Local geology matters too. Soft sediment can amplify seismic waves. Certain basins can trap energy. Loose water-saturated soils can liquefy temporarily, behaving more like a fluid than solid ground. Building design matters enormously. So, when an earthquake notification appears on your phone, never look only at magnitude. Ask, how deep was it? How close was it to population? What kind of fault ruptured? What are buildings like in that region? Was there tsunami potential? Those details tell you far more about the likely consequences. And while California receives enormous attention, another megacity lives with a similarly serious long-term earthquake problem. Istanbul. More than 16 million people live in the wider metropolitan region. Just south of the city lies the North Anatolian Fault, one of the world's best-known strike-slip fault systems. During the 20th century, major earthquakes ruptured sections of this fault in a remarkable sequence that generally progressed westward across Turkey. Each earthquake altered stress on nearby sections. The pattern gradually moved toward the Marmara region near Istanbul. The catastrophic 1999 Izmit earthquake magnitude, approximately 7.6, killed more than 1,700 people. It became one of the most important modern warnings about the risk facing western Turkey. The major locked section beneath the Marmara Sea has not produced an equivalent rupture for centuries. That means stress continues accumulating while the tectonic plates keep moving. Scientists have estimated several meters of potential slip deficit along portions of the fault. Imagine two sides of a fault that should have moved several meters relative to one another but remain locked. If that stored motion is eventually released in seconds, the resulting earthquake could be extremely powerful. A magnitude 6.2 event in the Marmara region in 2025 was enough to send hundreds of people to hospitals and trigger widespread panic. It was not the major earthquake scientists have long worried about, but it reminded millions of people exactly where they live. Studies over the years have produced substantial probabilities for a magnitude 7 class earthquake affecting the Istanbul region within coming decades. Those probabilities are not predictions. They do not tell us which year, but they are high enough that preparation is not optional. Istanbul faces some of the same vulnerability questions we discussed with Venezuela. Older buildings, uneven construction quality, dense neighborhoods, large numbers of structures built before modern seismic requirements. At the same time, Turkey has far more engineering and institutional capacity than Venezuela. So, Istanbul is not directly comparable to Caracas, but it is also not Tokyo, and that gap matters. Retrofitting millions of buildings takes years. It costs enormous amounts of money. It requires political commitment long before an earthquake becomes breaking news. And this brings us to one of the most important advances in modern earthquake science. Not earthquake prediction, earthquake early warning. Those are very different things. Prediction would mean scientists telling you that an earthquake will happen tomorrow. We cannot do that reliably. Early warning begins only after the earthquake has already started. When a fault ruptures, different seismic waves travel outward at different speeds. The first are P waves, or primary waves. They move faster. They generally cause weaker motion. Behind them come the slower S waves and surface waves, responsible for much of the destructive shaking. Seismic sensors located near the rupture can detect those first P waves. Computer systems rapidly calculate that an earthquake is underway. Then an electronic warning can travel through communications networks faster than the destructive seismic waves travel through rock. That difference creates a small window, sometimes only several seconds, sometimes tens of seconds. That may sound useless. It is not. 10 seconds can be enough to get underneath a sturdy desk. 10 seconds can be enough for a surgeon to pause a delicate procedure. 10 seconds can allow elevators to stop at the nearest floor and open. 10 seconds can allow factories to shut down hazardous equipment. 10 seconds can allow trains to start emergency braking. 10 seconds can let someone move away from a shelf full of heavy objects. Japan has operated nationwide earthquake warning technology for years. Alerts can appear on phones. They can interrupt broadcasts. They can interact with transportation and industrial systems. Because residents have practiced earthquake response repeatedly, those seconds are useful. People understand what to do with them. California's shake alert system follows the same basic principle. Seismic stations detect a rupture. Algorithms estimate its likely strength and location. Alerts are distributed through supported phone systems and applications such as MyShake. The warning may be short. People close to the epicenter may receive little or no notice because the seismic waves arrive almost immediately. People farther away can sometimes receive significantly more time. The technology continues improving, and the long-term goal is not simply to warn individuals. It is to integrate earthquake warning directly into infrastructure. Transportation, hospitals, factories, elevators, utilities, schools. Automated systems can react faster than people. That can reduce cascading damage. And once again, the contrast with Venezuela becomes painful. Most residents near the strongest shaking had no meaningful early warning. No alarm telling them that destructive waves were seconds away. The ground simply began moving. This is why preparation has to exist before the earthquake, because earthquakes themselves offer almost no advance notice. And that leads to the final point. The Earth has been producing earthquakes for billions of years. Tectonic plates moved long before humans existed. Faults ruptured long before the first city was built. Mountains rose. Ocean basins opened. Continents collided. And earthquakes released accumulated stress throughout all of it. We cannot stop that process. We cannot negotiate with a tectonic plate. We cannot prevent the San Andreas from moving forever. And we still cannot reliably predict the precise day, hour, and location of a major earthquake. But we can control vulnerability. That is the part of the earthquake equation human beings actually influence. Venezuela shows what can happen when a very powerful earthquake meets fragile infrastructure, economic crisis, weak building stock, and limited emergency capacity. Japan shows what can happen when similarly powerful geology meets decades of strict engineering, public education, warning systems, drills, and preparation. California is still writing its answer. Southern California knows the fault systems are active. Scientists know enormous earthquakes are possible. Engineers know which structures are vulnerable. Emergency managers know which transportation and utility systems could fail. The uncertainty is not whether major earthquakes belong to California's future. They do. The uncertainty is when they arrive and how prepared society will be on that day. And the same question applies to Istanbul, Manila, Tokyo, Mexico City, Lima, Jakarta, every major city located close to an active tectonic boundary. The biggest earthquake story is not that the entire planet has suddenly become unstable. It has not. The real story is that billions of people now live in a world where natural geological processes intersect with enormous cities, aging infrastructure, economic inequality, and increasingly interconnected systems. When those systems are resilient, a magnitude 7 earthquake can become a manageable emergency. When they are fragile, the same magnitude can become a national catastrophe. So wherever you live, learn your earthquake risk. If you are in California, take the new fault research seriously without interpreting it as a prediction. If you are in Japan, continue doing what generations of preparedness have taught the country to do. If you are in an earthquake-prone city anywhere else in the world, do not assume preparation is something governments alone handle. Secure heavy furniture. Store emergency water. Keep food and medication available. Have flashlights. Charge battery packs. Know where the gas shutoff is. Know where your family will meet. Know what you will do when the shaking begins. Drop, cover, Hold on. And after the shaking stops, expect aftershocks. Do not enter heavily damaged buildings. Stay away from broken electrical lines and leaking gas. If you are near a coastline and the earthquake was strong or long enough that standing became difficult, know your tsunami evacuation route and move to higher ground when authorities advise it. Preparation does not control geology. It controls what happens next. That is the lesson running through every story we covered today. Venezuela, Japan, California, Istanbul. Different tectonic environments, different economies, different levels of preparation, but the same planet underneath all of them. We will keep following the aftershock sequence in Venezuela. We will keep watching advisories and seismic developments around Japan. We will keep following new research on the San Andreas and San Jacinto systems. And whenever significant earthquake activity happens elsewhere around the world, we will break down what it actually means without pretending unrelated earthquakes are evidence that the planet is suddenly falling apart. Subscribe if you want those updates, and leave your experience in the comments. Have you ever felt an earthquake? Where were you? How strong was it? What did you notice first? Was it the sound? The movement? The light swinging? The floor rolling beneath your feet? Those personal experiences matter because earthquakes are not abstract geological diagrams. They happen beneath homes, schools, hospitals, roads, families, cities. The earth will keep moving. The question is how ready we are when it does. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I will see you in the next update.